Hey guys, so this is going to be your tutorial for chapter 4 of Mice and Men. And so there was a thing that I left off of the lecture for the last chapter on purpose, just because I wanted to see who was actually reading. Um, and so I just want to talk a little bit about um, the fight that happens between Curly and Lenny. Boy, it feels good for Curly to get what he deserves. So Curly just goes in on Lenny and starts punching him in the face. And George, well, I'll just read here a little bit. George was on his feet yelling, "Get him, Lenny! Don't let him do it!" Lenny covered his face with huge paws and bleated with terror. He cried, "Make him stop, George!" Then Curly attacked his stomach and cut off his wind. Slim jumped up. "The dirty little rat," he cried. "I'll get him myself." George put his hand and grabbed Slim. "Wait a minute," he shouted. He cupped his hand around his mouth and yelled, "Get him, Lenny!" Lenny took his hands away from his face and looked about for George, and Curly slashed at his eyes. The big face was covered with blood. George yelled again, "I said get him!" Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish in a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big hand. Lenny literally grabs Curly's fist and just crushes his hand. It's so bad that the excuse that the men make is that um, Curly got it mangled up in a machine. Um, so they managed to convince Curly, well, not really convince as much as intimidate Curly into lying on Lenny's behalf to protect Lenny, to say that he got it caught in a machine so that Lenny and George wouldn't get fired. At the start of our next chapter here, we're going to be spending some time with Crooks, and Crooks is called the Negro Stable Buck. And he has his own bunkhouse that's off away from the rest of the men because he's black. He's not allowed to fraternize with the white men who work on the farm. So for a while, we're going to have kind of three characters primarily here. We're going to have Crooks, who's black. We're going to have Lenny, who's considered slow in this universe, and we have Candy, who's going to be old and a cripple. And so what Steinbeck's doing here is he's kind of putting these three characters together, who are the undesirables, right? They're considered less than for some reason. So let's shrink me down a little bit here. So this is Crooks. And the thing about Crooks is that Crooks is crippled, and he's also black. So during this time period, black people were not considered equal. It's post-slavery, so they're considered people. They're not considered livestock like they were under slave doctrines. But like the world is still not friendly for black people. I mean, he's not even allowed to eat and play cards and stuff with the other men. So there's that to be aware of, right? And then Lenny, Lenny is just Lenny. Lenny doesn't understand what's going on in the world around him. He's considered like the innocent, but he's also he's not able to understand what is happening around him all the time, and that makes him weak in the eyes of the other men. And then we have Candy, who we've talked about extensively. Candy is old. Okay, so these three men, they're all kind of together, and the chapter starts where Crooks, Crooks finds Lenny just in his room, hanging out with him, right? And Crooks and Lenny, they kind of talk about the dream of owning the rabbits and owning the land and all of that stuff. And Crooks thinks it's just all hogwash, right? So he says on in my book, it's page 74. So he says, the men, they come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head, and never a goddamn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out there. Nobody ever gets to heaven. Right? So Crooks is kind of like telling Lenny, like, hey, that dream that you had, it's not going to happen. Right? And it's this idea that Steinbeck is playing here about how do we lose our dreams, and how do our dreams get away from us, and how do we try to better hold on to the dreams that we have. And we find out later on in the chapter that Curly's wife also had a dream, right? She wanted to be a famous actress. And now she is Curly's wife, right? She doesn't even have a name. She's not famous. She doesn't even have a name. And, we find out a whole bunch of things about her, about, her being flirted with an actor who promised he was going to write her letters, but she never got the letters. She thinks it's because they were stolen, but we probably could just assume that they never got written in the first place, right? And so again, it's just more of kind of their dreams falling apart. And going forward, the story is really going to focus on Lenny. And Lenny's dream, and Lenny's dreams kind of starting to fall apart, and the effect that has on everybody else in the story. So I hope you're enjoying it so far, and I'll see you guys at the end of chapter 5. We're almost done.